The most remarkable and perhaps the most defining feature of life as a human is that it takes place within the confines of time. Our entire human experience really takes place within the confines of time. You could even call time a defining feature of the human experience. Time, as we understand it, really gives context and meaning to this experience of being human. All changes take place in time. Now, we as people living in a world of at least 3 dimensions, when we review or when we see through our senses, when we interact through the faculties of our senses with 3D reality, we are really seeing things in a brief instant or in a cross-section of time, meaning that we really only see a single frame of really what is a movie, what is a series of moving pictures that take place and unfold in time. Now, here at Sunday Mystery School, we are really focused on the teachings of Neville Goddard and his original Masterclass in particular. And in lesson 5 of his original Masterclass, which is the topic for today, he really gets deeper into this idea of thinking fourth dimensionally. So as we understand it, the 3 dimensions are the dimensions of space that we can interact with and register using our 5 senses. And the 4th dimension is the dimension of time, which really arranges all of the experiences of our senses sequentially and really gives us a context for a story that we are living. So we have the past, which is in our present moment, a collection of memories of what things were. And we have what appears to be a future, which in the present moment is an anticipation of things to come. And then, of course, we have the present moment, which is our opportunity to measure in an instant, using our senses, what currently is. Neville explains, and we're going to get into it in the text for today's lesson, Neville explains that really our ability to up-level our language when it comes to our dimensional understanding of reality, up-level our language, meaning up-level our frame of reference, our ability to understand or to conceptualize the language of dimensions, is really tied to our ability to transcend what appears to be the limitations of time and begin to think in higher dimensions, begin to think or beginning to use our imagination to access realms outside of time. We're going to get into the text today here, and we're going to really take a deeper look at what the dimension of time is and how this ties into this idea of remaining faithful to our ideal, which is, of course, the title of lesson 5 of Neville's original Masterclass. Now, I think it bears repeating that the fundamental premise for everything that is taught in every mystery school, and in particular here at Sunday Mystery School, is that consciousness is the only reality. And that means that everything that we are observing in our experience, whether it be in the physical 3D, whether it be in time in the 4D, or whether it even be outside of time through an experience of our imagination, everything is consciousness. And consciousness is the only reality, meaning that there is no reality that can be perceived outside of consciousness. Consciousness is required in order for any reality to be perceived. Okay, so that's the fundamental premise here. Everything is taking place in consciousness, and we are simply experiencing, as humans, living in a sensory world, through the medium of our physical senses and the bodies that we have in this lifetime, we are experiencing dimensions of consciousness. And so, as we begin to really accept this as a fundamental premise of reality, and of course, the inherent suggestion in this is, don't just take my word for it. Don't just take the word of other mystics for it. You have to really determine this to be true for yourself by creating an experience in consciousness of consciousness. And of course, we teach here at Sunday Mystery School that the way to do that is through our imagination. To, using imagination, see an event in imagination before it takes place in the flesh, in the physical. That's really the definition of manifestation, is to consciously choose circumstances to experience physically before you experience them physically, using the tool of imagination, using the portal that is imagination, a portal to these higher dimensional realms. When we started Sunday Mystery School back 24 episodes ago, we talked about how really Sunday Mystery School is designed to be a language training, because the languages that we develop proficiency in and fluency in really give us access. It really gives us context and access to our ideas, to our ideas, to an expansion of ideas, and really our ability to really perceive possibility is really linked to our ability to frame possibility in language. Language is really a medium of access. And what we can speak about with fluency it clearly demonstrates understanding. So what we're able to speak about in a way that is fluent, meaning that it makes sense, that we have, well thought out, well documented principles of reasoning and of really determining. If we're able to speak about it with a fluency, that speaks to our understanding of an idea. So really, Sunday Mystery School, if we really just shrink it down to its core premise, it's that by developing the language of imagination, by developing dimensional language, we are really creating a framework and giving tangibility to what is otherwise pretty abstract ideas. I mean, the idea of creating an imagination is admittedly, or could be considered admittedly, quite abstract. So how do we give it tangibility? We do it by developing our language around it, so that we can develop handles for ideas that are words and link them together to create concepts, so that we can then discuss with other human beings and build a shared relationship to some of these higher dimensional ideas. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump into lesson 5, part 3. We're going to hear what Neville has to say, and then we're going to do our best to upgrade and modernize the language so that we really understand what is the nuance of what is being communicated here. Okay, just bringing the lesson here. Lesson 5, part 3. Okay. So Neville begins. He says, to an assumption, which, remember, assumptions harden into fact. If consciousness is the only reality, then it really is our assumptions in consciousness that create reality. That's the fundamental premise here. To an assumption, all means which promote its realization are good. An assumption influences the behavior of everyone by inspiring in everyone the movements, the actions, and the words which tend towards its fulfillment. To understand how humans mold their future in harmony with our assumptions, by simply experiencing in our imagination what we would experience in reality if we were to realize our goal, we must know what we mean when we give the term dimensionally larger world. What is a dimensionally larger world? Because it really is a dimensionally larger world that we access or tap into when we choose to alter our future. When we choose to alter our future. So this is the promise that is given to people who attempt to develop, who choose to develop this faculty of dimensional thinking. We have the opportunity to really shape, mold, and consciously choose our future. We can alter our future. And we do so by learning to think this way, because imagination is the portal to create reality. And so by learning to think this way, we can begin to use imagination to consciously create circumstances. And this is exactly what mystics exist to do. All mystics that are on this path, the way, as we've come to understand it, are using imagination to consciously create circumstances. Neville continues. He says, the observation of an event before it occurs implies that the event is predetermined from the point of view of a human in a three-dimensional world. Okay, so if I can see an event before it happens in my three-dimensional world, then that must mean that it's predetermined. Okay, now this is something that philosophers have been talking about, this idea of destiny, of fate. Are we living through, a predetermined reality with a pre-chosen outcome, and, we're just, at the whims of fate, or at the whims of the winds of destiny, which are going to blow us to a predetermined, exit point, right? Like, is everything just kind of, are we all just following along according to a pre-written script? And do we or do we not have free will in terms of choosing what we're going to experience in life? This has been, an item of great debate over the centuries. All sorts of, philosophers have had these types of discussions. And what Neville is saying is that it really does appear that if we can use our imagination to view an event before it occurs here in the 3D, then really that makes it appear that the event is fated, or is destiny, or is predetermined, at least from the point of view of being in the 3D. Okay, so while our thinking is limited to the 3D, it seems like we're adhering to a script. Okay? If we're going to change conditions here in the 3 dimensions of space, we actually have to tap into a dimensionally larger world. We have to tap into the 4th dimension of space if we're going to consciously change the 3rd dimension of space. And how do we do that? Well, we use the portal of our imagination. Neville continues. He says, now, maybe we don't know exactly what is meant by the term dimensionally larger world. Many people would no doubt deny the existence of a dimensionally larger self. We are quite familiar with the 3 dimensions: length, width, and height. And we may feel that if there were a 4th dimension, it would be just as obvious to us as the 3 dimensions that we currently use to measure things in our reality, which are length, width, and height. Neville continues. He says, a dimension is not a line. A dimension is really any way in which a thing can be measured that is entirely different from all other ways. Okay, so it's like you take an object and you're like, how can I measure this object to define it using data from my observations? Okay, so the first step would probably be to measure its length, and then you would measure its width, you would measure its height. What is another attribute or characteristic of it that you could measure? Whatever that 4th thing is that you can measure, that would be a 4th dimension of measurement. And Neville says, one of these dimensions of measurement that transcends the length, width, and height is time. Time meets this criteria of being another way to measure something that is completely different from all other ways. Time. There is no such thing as an instantaneous object, meaning that an object has a beginning and it has an end. An object appears in time and disappears in time. So time becomes another way of measuring an object. The way Neville says is, he says, the appearance and disappearance are measurable. Any object will endure for a definite length of time. And we can measure its lifespan without using length, width, or height, which makes time definitely a fourth way of measuring an object. The more dimensions an object has, the more substantial and real it becomes. A straight line exists entirely in one dimension. We're going to use our imagination for this, and so I'm just going to ask you, if you're following along with me in this moment, to use your imagination and create in your mind's eye a line. Okay, so just a straight line, single dimension. That line acquires shape, mass, and substance by adding additional dimensions. Okay, so that line, you can now draw it from right to left, and then you can make it a surface, and then you can give it depth, and you can make it a cube. And as you begin to add dimensions to this object, the object becomes more tangible. It becomes more real, more substantial. And so Neville says, what new quality would time, the fourth dimension, give to an object, which would make it just as vastly superior to solids as solids are to surfaces and surfaces are to lines? Okay, so we're going to reverse engineer that here. So a line becomes a surface when you make it a square, and it becomes a solid when you make it a cube. Okay, so that's 1, 2, and 3 dimensions. So when you give it that depth, that's when it becomes a cube. And so that's when it becomes a solid. And then now when you place that object in your mind's eye, existing on a timeline, that's when we have given it a fourth dimension of measurement. And this is a key point. Time is a medium for changes in experience. For all changes take time. All changes occur within time. The new quality that using this fourth dimension of measurement measures is indeed changeability. We use time to measure the changeability of something. If we bisect a solid, its cross-section is a surface. If we bisect a surface, we obtain a line. And by bisecting a line, we get a point. This means that a point is but a cross-section of a line. A line is but a cross-section of a surface. A surface is but a cross-section of a solid, and a solid is but a cross-section of a fourth dimensional object. This may seem a bit abstract, but this is a dimensional way of thinking that, when unlocked, really blossoms possibilities for each of us. And that's why we're really investing in going deep into this idea of developing the language around dimensionality. Okay, so a point is a cross-section of a line. A line is a cross-section of a surface. So when we make a line into a square, but not a cube, a line is a cross-section of that square. That square is a cross-section of a cube. If you take a cube and you cut it in half and you look at just the surface, that would be just a surface and not the actual cube. And then that fourth dimension is, now I have this object, which is this solid, but it is existing within time, meaning that I'm observing it within a single state, because time measures its ability to change. Okay, so now I'm considering, outside of time, what did it look like before and what will it look like after, because time is a measurement of changeability. So if this object is capable of being changed, and it's existing in time. So I can look at it and roll the time back to its origin. Where did this object come from? And then I can roll it forward and I can look at, what is its future? I'm gonna make this a little bit more tangible. I know it's we're kind of playing with abstract ideas by making it cubes. Let's take a chair. Okay, we're gonna really make this applicable so we can understand the dimensionality, the language around dimensionality. Okay, so let's take a chair. Okay, so let's take an ordinary wood dining room table chair. Okay, constructed of wood. Okay, we can measure a chair. We can measure how tall the chair is. We can measure the height of its different points. The seat is X number of inches off the ground. The back is X number of inches off the ground from the floor. Each of the legs of the chair, all 4 of them, are each a certain height, length, width, right? We can measure all of the dimensions of this chair, and we can really, through gaining observational data in the form of taking measurements, we can really define the presence of this chair as an object, okay? And so now, if we are going to measure this object in the 4th dimension, now we would step outside of time and we would see this chair from its origin point to its end point, whatever we define that to be. So we could say that the origin point, we could go all the way back to the tree. Okay, so the origin point could be, that sprouting of the seed in the ground that would eventually become a tree, that would eventually become harvested for its wood, that would eventually, right? So we're standing outside of time and like watching a movie frame by frame. We're watching this tree grow, be harvested, enter into a lumber factory, be cut up into pieces, make its way to a carpenter's desk or workbench where the carpenter is then shaping it, molding it, beginning to build a chair. And then it becomes a chair, and then it becomes packaged, and then it gets sent to a store, and then someone goes and buys the chair, and then it arrives perhaps in your home. And then if we continue moving that movie from outside of time, maybe that chair then gets passed down as an heirloom to someone in a future generation. And then maybe at some point that house is sold and the chair is donated, and maybe it becomes, a part of a local community center. And then maybe another, 50 years goes by and it is discarded and it makes its way to a landfill. Okay. So standing outside of time, we would both, okay, this is the key aspect of the dimensionality of the discussion that we're having right here. We would both be able to measure the chair in the state that we're currently observing it, which is all of those measurements that I talked about. Where is the seat? How tall are the legs? What is the height of the back? We'd be able to take all of those measurements, and we would also be able to step out from the origin point of that seed that became the tree and the end point of, it decomposing in a landfill, okay? And we would be able to say, okay, on this entire timeline of the existence of this chair, where are we measuring it? Where in that life cycle of this chair are we now finding this chair? Okay, so this would be a 4th dimension of measurement of the chair. Not only are we able to take the 3D sensory measurements, we're also able to step out a level and see its entire lifespan. Okay, so we'll be able to measure where it is on this timeline. Okay, now obviously, implied in this analogy is that we can also do this for ourselves. Okay, we can also do this for our own lives. We can actually step outside of time and we can take a measurement of ourselves based on not just, our height, our width, our depth, whatever we appear to be in the senses. We can also step outside of time and we can say from the origin point all the way to the end point, we're measuring on this timeline, where are we? Where are we? That's a measure of the changeability of an object, because we evolve from our origin point to our exit point. I'm speaking in a physical sense. Physical origin point and the physical exit point. There's an evolution that takes place across that timeline. And so we can actually step outside of time. We can learn to think this way and take a measurement. Where are we in the changeability? And that's a 4th way to measure an object or measure a person or measure really anything that we are becoming aware of in the 3D, we are becoming aware of in time. And so as we learn to awaken our imagination, activate our ability to think in alignment with higher dimensions of thinking, we can actually step outside of time and say, okay, I'm encountering what is really an object as just a cross section of time. I'm now seeing this chair, but I understand that I'm catching it in a certain state. Okay, it's not what it's always been, and it's not what it always will be. I'm just catching it in a frame that is a movie, that is the waxing, the waning, from the origin to the exit, the waxing and the waning that takes place. So when an object comes into its fullness and then disappears from sight, I'm actually taking a measurement of this in time, and I understand that it is, I'm just seeing a cross section of a dimensionally larger object, and that dimensionally larger object contains the whole experience of that chair. Okay. Or going back to the human example, you are seeing me in this moment on this live stream as a cross section of my fourth dimensional self, which would take into account my entire existence from my origin point to my exit point. And again, I am speaking in a physical context because obviously there's a non-physical element of me that does not have an origin or an end point. But speaking in a physical, you're seeing my body here. You are seeing me in the state that I am now. But there's also, if you were to step outside and really regard me as a fourth dimensional, really understand that you're seeing me as a cross section of what is a fourth dimensional object. To really behold me as a fourth dimensional being, you would have to see both me as a freshly fertilized egg, really beginning to do that cell splitting, right? Cell division to eventually, become a fetus and eventually become a human being, all the way up to the point where I'm on my deathbed and breathing my last breath. You would have to comprehend me and see that as an animated, living, present whole. Now, how do we do this? Practice. It's available. It's right there in imagination. If you're able to follow along with anything I just said, that proves to you that you have the ability to think from this higher dimensionality. Now it's just a matter of practicing and also learning to speak the language of it so that it's not just abstract, but through our words, we begin to give it tangibility. Neville continues, we cannot avoid the inference that all three-dimensional objects are but cross-sections of fourth-dimensional bodies. Which means when I meet you, I am meeting a cross-section of the fourth-dimensional you. The fourth-dimensional self that is not seen with my physical eyes, because my physical eyes register things that are associated with the wavelength of light that my eyes can perceive in the 3D. Okay, so my physical eyes are limited inside of time. I can only see the cross sections. My imagination is not limited in this way. With my imagination, I can actually transcend what I can see with my physical eyes, and I can comprehend you as a fourth dimensional self. But from a three-dimensional perspective, the fourth dimensional self is not seen. To see the fourth dimensional self, I must see every cross section or every moment of your life from birth to death and see them all as coexisting now. Because remember, thinking from this higher level of dimension is truly outside of time. And so now from standing outside of time, we can look at something that exists in time and see all of the dimensions of its changeability as one living, congruent, animated whole. My focus should take in the entire array of sensory impressions which you have experienced on Earth, plus those you will encounter. And I should see them, not in the order sequentially that they were experienced by you. I should see them as a present whole, because again, we're outside of time. Because change is the characteristic, it is the defining characteristic of the fourth dimension, of time. I should see these, all of your sensory impressions, in a state of flux as a living, animated whole. The mental picture that I get when I consider these words that Neville just shared with us I see a vibrating, shape-shifting, animated cluster of possibilities. It's not just seeing someone in a single state, it's seeing someone in all possible states. And it's vibrating and it's animated. There's a lot of movement to this dimensional picture. It's like you can take, a three-dimensional object, you step outside of time and it just becomes a sphere, and you're observing the sphere, and it's like seeing all of the frames of a movie at once. Or maybe if you were to speed up an hour-long movie to where it goes by in a matter of seconds. I know we're still talking within time when we say it that way, but it can help us to really comprehend this. If you were to take an hour-long movie and time lapse it to where it happens, in a matter of seconds, or maybe use another example, it's a little more tangible. If you've ever watched the time lapse of plants going through their life cycle, you see the little sprout come up out of the ground, and then it develops, puts off the leaves, eventually comes to a flower, goes through the whole process, and then folds back up and decays back down into the ground. That's watching it sequentially through time. If you were able to take that image and animate it to where you're seeing a plant in all of its states of being at once, from the inception of it sticking up out of the ground all the way to it going back into the ground in a state of decomposition. If you're able to view all of that as one living animated whole, that's comprehending this plant from the fourth dimension. It's a higher dimensional perspective on what in the 3D is a plant, which in our ordinary level of consciousness, we only see in a single state at a time. I go out into my garden and I see, a plant, and it's in a single state. I'm taking a snapshot of it in time. Oh, currently the leaves are green and I see that the flowers are budding. Okay, that's like one snapshot. But if I were to step outside of time, I would be able to see it all the way from its inception point of, the first sprout, all the way through all of the ways that it expresses, all the way back down to when it's dead again and decomposing in the soil. I'd be able to comprehend that entire life cycle of the plant just in my imagination, just by tapping into that higher dimensional realm. Okay, now you may be thinking, why do I need to learn how to think this way? Maybe your brain's feeling a little bit stretched right now. And if so, that's a good thing. We came here to evolve our abilities. So that's why we're having this conversation. Why is it important that we learn to think this way? Well, this is the energetic key. Learning to think this way is the energetic key that unlocks a lot of things. And one of the primary things that it unlocks is full confidence in our ability to consciously choose circumstances. As long as it seems like mind magic, there's always the possibility for doubt. Okay, as long as you're listening to law of attraction or law of assumption teachers, and they're talking about, oh, just focus on what you want or the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and it just magically appears. When you don't understand the process and it just magically appears, you just have to have faith, just have to have trust. That can be enough. And also, sometimes for some of us, it leaves open a little crack in the door of doubt. When you begin to think and cultivate your ability to think from higher dimensions, when you really begin to develop your imagination to be able to tap into higher realms, higher perspectives, and begin to think dimensionally, now you're understanding really the science of how reality is operated. And that little door of doubt becomes slammed shut, because now it's no longer, oh, it's just like magic. It just happens. There's a famous quote: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, meaning that you can encounter an incredibly advanced technology and you will think that it's just magic, because magic is another way of saying, I don't know how to explain it, but I saw it happen. Okay, I don't know how to explain it, but I saw it happen. Okay, this is one of those things where when you learn to think dimensionally in this way and learn to perceive in this way, the mystery is removed. It's no longer just magic. Now you understand the technology that is consciousness. the dimensional technology that is consciousness. And that's really what we're developing by having this conversation. Okay, so Neville says, if we have all of this clearly fixed in our minds, what does it mean to us in the 3D? It means that if we can move along the length of time in our imagination, if we can develop this ability to perceive from outside of time the entire timeline, we can both see the future and, if we desire, we can alter the future. We can alter the future. By developing this ability to perceive with dimensional thinking, we can alter the future. We can learn to consciously choose circumstances. How does this work? It all starts with what we believe the world is. This world, we think it is solidly real. Well, maybe some of us do. A lot of us have come to understand that it's not. It's vibrating energy. There's nothing solid about it. But really, this world, which some of us may think is solidly real, is actually just a shadow, out of which and beyond we may at any time pass. By learning to think dimensionally in this way, by unlocking our consciousness and awareness, we can actually transcend the shadow that is this dimensional, third dimensional existence. The 3D world, our 3D existence, is an abstraction from a more fundamental, dimensionally larger world. And that world is an abstraction from a still more fundamental world and dimensionally larger world. And that world is an abstraction, and so on, and so on, and so on to infinity. The absolute is unattainable by any means or analysis, no matter how many dimensions we add. Okay, so this is where Neville, as a mystic, differs slightly from other mystics that I've heard speak about this. Other mystics have defined a certain number of dimensions as really existing in consciousness. Neville, I've heard him say both in this masterclass and other places, he perceives it as being infinite, meaning that there is no end. It really is fractal and holographic, meaning that, the whole contains every part contains the whole, and so on to infinity. Okay, so for our purposes, it doesn't really matter whether there's 9, 12, 20, or infinite dimensions. That's something that, we can ponder, but I feel for most of us, until we have developed our ability to think outside the 3D and really develop, fourth and fifth thinking, 9th, 12th, 20th, and infinite dimensional thinking is really for entertainment purposes only. So we're going to stay focused on really, at least for now, right? Maybe we get there later in mystery school, but for where we are right now, this is fundamental. We must develop the language of fourth dimensional thinking and make sure that we really deeply comprehend it. Okay? So Neville says we can prove the existence of a dimensionally larger world simply by focusing our attention on an invisible state and imagining that we see and feel it. If we remain concentrated in this state, our present environment will pass away and we will awaken in a dimensionally larger world where the object of our contemplation will be seen as a concrete, objective reality. There's a very esoteric feel to what Neville just said. I'm going to read this paragraph one more time. He says, we can prove the existence of a dimensionally larger world by simply focusing our attention on an invisible state and imagining that we see and feel it. If we remain concentrated in this state, our present environment will pass away and we will awaken in a dimensionally larger world where the object of our contemplation will be seen as a concrete, objective reality. I've heard this concept described as reality shifting or perhaps quantum leaping. There's a lot of ways to engage with this, but we're going to stay focused on learning the language here. And some of these ideas are a little bit more advanced that we have the opportunity to explore at another time in that ever shifting whole, right? That is our changeability, right? So it's like we are here now and we're moving towards developing other aspects of our thinking, but we're here right now. So it's like another way to really relate to this idea of where we are in time. Neville says, I feel intuitively that were we able to abstract our thoughts from this dimensionally larger world and retreat still farther within our own minds, we would again bring about an externalization of time. We would discover that every time we retreat into our inner mind and bring about an externalization of time, space becomes dimensionally larger. We would therefore conclude that both time and space are serial, and the drama of life is but the climbing of a multitudinous dimensional time lock. The drama of life is but the climbing of a multitudinous dimensional time block. Now, I can relate to this idea because I have invested time in my imagination in deep states of contemplation, viewing time both from inside and outside. So I've developed a relationship to this idea. And again, we're learning the language of it, right? So Neville's, presenting it in this way, but the bottom line here is he's describing our universe as being serial, a serial universe, meaning sequential, meaning one follows the other. It's a serial universe. Neville says scientists are learning how to explain this, why there is a serial universe. But in practice, the most important thing is how we use the serial universe to change the future. Okay, let's be very practical about this. We'll learn how to explain what the serial universe is using science. That's something that's emerging. There's emerging fields of research and study that are learning to describe the serial nature of the universe. But really, what we care about in this moment is learning to understand how a serial universe gives us the ability to change the future, how we can use our dimensional understanding of a serial universe to change the future. Neville says, in order to change the future, we only need to concern ourselves with two worlds in what he describes as the infinite series of worlds. Our sensory world, the one that we perceive with our bodily organs, and the world of imagination, which is independent of our bodily organs. I have stated, Neville says, that man, at every moment of time, has the choice before him. Or to word this, where he's speaking to us, Neville says, I have stated that we have at every moment of time the choice before us, which of several futures we will have. But the question arises, how is it possible that we have a choice as to which future we will experience when, from the perspective of the 3D, the experiences that we have are predetermined, as our ability to observe an event before it occurs implies. Okay, so this is really where we're bringing the ideas together here. So we start off by saying, if we can view an event outside of time before it occurs in time, then that means that time must be running on some sort of script. And we can now access the script and then kind of make that relationship between, I saw it in the script, and then now it just happened, on the grand drama of my life. So that must mean that there's some sort of predetermined script that life is operating from. Okay, so how is it possible then to change the script? And this is where Neville begins to really give us an analogy. We're going to go into it here. He says, the ability to change the future will be seen if we liken the experiences of life on Earth to a printed page of text. We experience events on Earth singly and successively in the same way that we read a page of text. We experience each word on the page singly and successfully. Okay, so we start with one word, we move to the next, and as we're moving from word to word, we're building context, and eventually we arrive at a meaning of a sentence. Okay, so that's exactly how we experience life on Earth, moment by moment, which is akin to word by word. Imagine that every word on this page represents a single sensory impression. To get the context and to understand my meaning, you focus your vision on the first word in the upper left-hand corner, and then move your focus across the page from left to right, letting it fall on each word singly and successively, meaning sequentially, one after the other. By the time your eyes reach the last word on the page, you have extracted the meaning of the sentence. But suppose that looking at the page, with all of the printed words thereon equally present, you could decide to rearrange them. You could take all of the words on this page, and by rearranging their order, you could tell an entirely different story. In fact, you could tell many different stories. Neville says a dream of sleep, is nothing more than uncontrolled fourth dimensional thinking. Another way of saying that is that a dream, the dreams that we have when we go to bed at night and we sleep in an uncontrolled state. So we go pass through the hypnagogic window, the portal state, where we have control of our attention, and we surrender into the subconscious, the unconscious, where we lose control of our attention. What is that? We're still in the fourth dimension, but it's uncontrolled. And so what we do is we take and create a rearrangement of past and future sensory impressions, and we rearrange them, and it becomes a dream that we have that night. We seldom dream of events in the order that we experience them when we are awake. Okay, so if we're going to have a day, and that day is a script upon the page, and it's sentence by word, sentence by sentence of what we will experience that day, okay, in waking reality, then in a dream of sleep, that page, all of the words are extracted, rearranged, out of order, reshaped, reorganized, and then becomes a dream that we're experiencing out of order, right? Of how we would experience them in waking consciousness. Okay, so uncontrolled fourth dimensional thinking, sensory impressions of the past, of the future, all rearranged. This explains why when you have dreams and you remember the dreams, a lot of times you wake up and you're like, wow, I haven't thought of that person in a long time, but they were in my dream. Okay, that's a sensory impression of the past brought into the present. And then maybe something happens in the dream that later on that day also happens in your waking reality. That's an example of the fourth dimension of your imagination, which of course is not limited to time. It's, can see outside of time, taking an event of the future, mixing it with the person from the past, putting it together, rearranging it, giving you a dream of sleep. The way Neville describes this, he says, we usually dream of two or more events which are separated in time that are fused into a single sensory impression. Or we completely rearrange our single waking sensory impressions so that we do not recognize them when we encounter them in our waking state. He's going to give an example of this, and I think this is a great example. He says, I had a dream at night, a sleeping dream, like a normal sleepful state dream, that he delivered a package. Neville took a package to the restaurant in his apartment building and delivered a package. And the hostess said, you can't leave that there. And then the elevator operator gave him some letters, and Neville said, thank you. And the elevator operator in turn thanked him back. And then The night elevator operator came into the scene, this dream, waved at Neville. Okay, and that was the end of the dream as he's sharing it. The next day, when he woke up from having this dream, he left the apartment and he picked up a few letters which had been placed at my door. On the way down, he tipped the elevator operator and said, "Thank you for taking care of my mail." And the elevator operator then thanks him for the tip. Okay. Then, as he's coming home, he walks into his apartment building and hears the doorman say to a delivery man, "You can't leave that there." And he's about to take the elevator up to the apartment. He sees a familiar face in the restaurant and he looks in, and the hostess sees him and greets him with a smile. That night, he's escorting his dinner guests to the elevator. And as he said goodbye to them, the night operator waved goodnight at Neville. Okay, so just to make sure this really lands, what he's saying is that he dreamed his next day, but completely rearranged and out of order, and everything kind of muddled together. And because he has cultivated this profound awareness of his states, because that's what he's teaching us to do, that's the life that Neville is living. He's in supreme awareness of his states, which is also what every mystic aspires to do, to be completely aware of our imaginal acts, to hold that high level of presence and lucidity in all of our states, but particularly while we're awake, and then obviously learning to do it while we sleep as well, which is another practice. Because he's in the state of supreme lucidity, he knows the dreams that he had at night, and then he sees how they outpictured during the day, but at night he dreamed them out of order. And then in day, they happened rearranged, right? Sensory impressions, that's the key point. The sensory impressions were the same. The night operator still waved to him, but the context of the story was different, right? The hostess still greeted him. The context of the story was different. He still heard with the hearing of the ear, "You can't leave that there," but the context was different in the waking versus the sleeping. Okay, I hope this is landing, kind of weaving this together to understand how our consciousness is operating and get some of this dimensional thinking. By simply rearranging a few of the single sensory impressions I was destined to encounter, and by fusing two or more of them into single sensory impressions, I constructed a dream which differed quite a bit from my waking experience. And of course, this dream happened before the day happened. So he was literally dreaming of the future, but really he was just simply dreaming in fourth dimension, outside of time. When we have learned to control the movements of our attention in the fourth dimensional world, we shall be able to consciously create circumstances in the three-dimensional world. We learn this control through the waking dream, where our attention can be maintained without effort. For attention minus the effort is indispensable to changing the future. We can, in a controlled waking dream, consciously construct an event which we desire to experience in the three-dimensional world. The esoteric nature of this statement is difficult to overstate. What Neville is implying here is that when we enter this portal state of consciousness, that is our access to the fourth dimensional realm of thinking. And so through a controlled waking dream, we can access the fourth dimension, which contains all possible sensory impressions. Everything that we could possibly experience with our physical human sensory organs is available to us in the realm of imagination that is 4D thinking. And so in a controlled waking dream, we can go into the silence and we can rearrange sensory impressions from the past, the present, and the future into a scene which implies that that which we desire to experience has occurred. Okay, we are rearranging the words on the page. We are rearranging from outside of time that element of changeability that is time. Neville says the sensory impressions that we use to construct our waking dream our present realities displaced in time, meaning in the fourth dimensional world. Okay, so every sensory impression that we could experience is a reality. It's real from a fourth dimensional perspective. It already is existing in the now. In the three-dimensional perspective, we haven't experienced it yet. But in the fourth, because we're moving frame by frame, okay? But in the fourth dimension, all frames are present. All frames of that movie are present. We can see all possible sensory impressions. All that we do in constructing the waking dream is to select from the vast array of sensory impressions those specific sensory impressions which, when they are properly arranged, imply that we have realized our desire. With the dream clearly defined, we relax in a chair. We induce a state of consciousness akin to sleep. This is that portal state we've talked about at length at Sunday Mystery School. We want to border on sleep while leaving us in conscious control of the movements of our attention. And then we experience in our imagination an arrangement of sensory impressions consciously chosen, which we would experience in 3D reality, were this waking dream an objective fact, were it actually happening. These are the sensory impressions that would occur. We experience them outside of time in imagination, what we would experience were it an objective fact. In applying this technique to change the future, it is important to remember that the only thing which occupies the mind during the waking dream is the waking dream. The predetermined action and sensation, which implies the fulfillment of our desire. Remember when he says it must crowd out all other states? The feeling of the wish fulfilled, that imaginal scene, that imaginal act must crowd out of our awareness. It must dominate our awareness to the point where it becomes a single-minded focus. That's what he's saying here. The only thing which occupies the mind during the waking dream is the waking dream. How the waking dream becomes a fact in the physical is not our concern. Our acceptance of the waking dream as physical reality is what creates the means for its fulfillment. Why? Because consciousness is the only reality, and our assumptions harden into fact. Because we are the observers, we are the ones, we are in consciousness watching consciousness. So when we use our consciousness to observe in consciousness an event, and we assume that we experienced it, that assumption then hardens it into fact, and we experience in the 3D what we first experienced in the 4D. We experience in the 3D in time what we experienced in the 4D outside of time. We'll let that marinate for just a moment. I'm going to sip my coffee here, and then we're going to review once again the foundation of prayer. Okay. If you are tracking with us so far, give yourself a little pat on the back, because this is next level training for sure. This is next level training to learn to think this way. And it requires strong focus and a mental and really spiritual determination to develop this aspect of your awareness. It's certainly not for those lacking in courage or for the faint of heart. This is for those who are really committed to really being a mystic, really committed to really walking this path that is the way, to really developing our multidimensionality. Okay, so in review, Neville is going to once again lay the foundation of prayer, which he describes prayer as a controlled waking dream. Step one, define your objective. You must know exactly what you want. Step two, construct an event which you believe you would naturally encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. Something which will have personal, first person, present tense action of self predominant, meaning you need to be doing something in this controlled waking dream. You're taking some sort of action. And this event must imply the fulfillment of your desire. Step three, immobilize the physical body, induce a state of consciousness akin to sleep. That's that sleepy portal state we've spoken about. Then mentally feel yourself right into the proposed action until the single sensation of fulfillment dominates the mind, imagining all the while that you are actually doing it here and now, so that you experience in imagination what you would experience with your senses in the flesh were you now realizing your goal. Experience has convinced me that this is the easiest way to achieve our goal. However, my own many failures would convict me were I to imply that I have completely mastered the movements of my attention. But I can, with the ancient teacher, say, this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize. Again, I want to remind you that the responsibility to make what you have done real in this world is not on your shoulders. Do not be concerned with the how. You have assumed that it is done, and that assumption has its own way of objectifying itself. All responsibility to make it so has been removed from you. There is a little statement in the book of Exodus which really bears this out or explains this. Millions of people who have read it or have had it mentioned to them throughout the centuries have completely misunderstood it. The saying goes like this: steep not a kid in its mother's milk. King James Version, it says, thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. That's Exodus 23:19. Neville says millions of people, completely misunderstanding this statement, to this very day, in the, as he calls it, enlightened age of 1948, refuse to eat dairy products with a meat dish because they think the Bible is history. And when it says in the Bible, steep not a kid in its mother's milk, they think milk means the products of milk, such as butter and cheese. They will not eat at the same time they take any kind of milk, butter, and cheese. They will even cook in separate dishes because they believe the Bible told them not to cook meat and dairy products together. But the real key to this verse is to understand it psychologically. You have done your meditation. You have gone into the silence. You have experienced in your imagination what you would experience sensorially in the flesh had you realized your objective. You have done it. You have assumed that you are what you want to be. You know that consciousness is God. Your attention is the stream of life itself. Your attention is the milk that nurses and makes alive that which holds your attention. In other words, what holds your attention has your life. What holds your attention has your life. Throughout the centuries, a kid has been used as the symbol of sacrifice. You have given birth to everything in your world. But there are things that you no longer wish to keep alive. Although you have mothered and fathered them, you are a jealous father that can easily consume, like Cronus from the mythology, you can easily consume your children, these things that you have given birth to as part of the everything that is in your world. It is your right to do this. You have the right to consume what you formerly expressed when you did not know better. Now you are detached in consciousness from that former state. That former state was your child. It was your kid. You embodied it. You expressed it in your world. It held your attention and it held your life. But now that you have assumed that you are what you want to be, do not look back on your former state and wonder how it will disappear from your world. Okay, we're going to make this very practical. I've assumed that I'm now living in a new home. Well, what's going to happen with this home? Okay, that's looking back on the former state and wondering how it's going to disappear from my world. If you look back and you give attention to the former state, you are steeping the kid in its mother's milk, because the kid is your offspring. That is what you've already manifested. That which is of the past, right? We're literally living in the dead manifestations of the past. Like whatever we see now is what we imagined before. Okay, so to continue to stare at what is, we are now feeding it with our consciousness, with our attention, which gives it life. Our attention is life-giving. Okay, so if we use the analogy of a garden, okay, our attention is the watering hose. And if there's a bunch of weeds in our garden and we just stare at them, why are you in my garden? My garden was so beautiful. Why do they have to be weeds? Oh, I really don't like these weeds. They're so ugly and I'm just staring at them, right? And the whole time I'm staring at them, what am I doing? I'm watering them with my attention. And what are they going to do? They're going to grow and they're going to get bigger and they're going to take over more of the garden, okay? Because I'm focusing on what I don't want in this analogy. And obviously the teaching here that is implied is that to get rid of the weeds, I stop watering them with my attention. And this is why all of the enlightened beings, all of the sages and wise people of the centuries have said, do not fight against what you don't want. Do not, protest, right? There's all these people, that do the protests and they do marches and they carry signs and they're, activists this and activists that. That's a state. And if that's what you want to invest your attention in, okay, just understand that that's not going to change things. That is not what changes things. You can express that way, but that's not what actually makes the change, because all of that attention that is being put on what we don't want simply feeds the beast. Okay, so all of the enlightened beings from the most ancient of times have taught us that in order to solve a problem, we must rise beyond the level of consciousness that created the problem. Okay, so in this example, rather than marching and protesting against what we don't want and thus feeding it with our attention and creating more of it, the more we protest, the more we'll have to protest about. What we do instead is we rise in consciousness to a new level of understanding. And what we do is we create in our mind's eye, what would the feeling be like fill in the blank, whatever social injustice I feel inspired to change. What would the feeling be like if we were now experiencing justice in this area? If everyone was being treated fairly and honorably and everyone was living with the rightful dignity of being human, right? Like whatever the solution is, it would be a new level of thinking. And so what we would do to change the world is we would change ourselves by changing our thinking, as contrasted by going out and pouring a bunch of energy into what we don't want by rallying against it. Okay? Do not say to yourself, I wonder if I really did detach from that old state. I wonder if so-and-so is true. Instead, give all of your attention to the assumption that it is true, that the thing is so. Give all of your attention, he is saying. focus all of your attention that it is true. Because all responsibility to make it true is removed from your shoulders. All you must do is focus your attention on it being true. You do not have to make it so. It is so. Remember, we've learned to think dimensionally so that we can slam that door of doubt. We know it is so because we understand the fourth dimension. We understand that, what other people cannot see in the 3 dimension, we have seen in the 4th dimension. We know that it is so. How do we know? That which I have done, I have done. I was there. I saw it. I experienced it. I know that it is real. I was there. Okay? I'm the first person witness of that event. I, in my imagination, traveled in time from outside of time to experience the changeability of time, and I rearranged sensory impressions into a scene which would imply the fulfillment of my objective. What you appropriate is already a fact, and you walk in the assumption that it is a fact in a way that you don't know, you don't have to know, I don't have to know, nobody has to know. It's consciousness, has ways and means we know not of. It's not our job in the role of being human. Our job is to learn to create this way. This is a mystery school planet. We're all here to learn how to do this. In a way that we do not know, it becomes objectified in our world. Do not be concerned with the how. I like to say I have retired from the how because I've learned how to do the work in my imagination to see the end, right? So, when you've worked a full career, you've earned retirement, right? Well, I did the work in my imagination by constructing the end. I have now earned retirement from the how. Don't have to do the how. I have seen the end. The Bible says it like this: no one, having put their hand to the plow and then looking back, is fit for the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. Okay? If you remember the biblical story, it's coming to me in this moment, where they're leaving the city of judgment and they're commanded not to look back, but Lot's wife looks back and she's turned into a pillar of salt. Salt is a preservative. If you look back on what was, you preserve it with your attention, right? Because now you're flowing life into it. Whereas if you were just leaving and focused on your new objective, the old city would fall away on its own. Simply assume that it is done and suspend reason, because reason is a limited way of thinking. We're taught to think using reason, and it all relies on the evidence of the senses. And it's very useful for solving very, physical 3D, mechanical problems. But when it comes to higher dimensional ways of thinking and being and languaging, reason must be suspended. We have to go outside of our limited 3D thinking capacity and begin to think from a higher dimension. Suspend the arguments of the 3D mind. Our desire is outside of the reach of the 3D mind, and that's why we're going into imagination to create it. And he concludes with this sentence, which is the key teaching of this entire lesson. Assume that you are that which you wish to be. Walk as though you were it. And as you remain faithful to your assumption, it will harden into fact. Definitely stretching our cognitive and consciousness facilities today. And I trust it has been helpful to really deep dive into this language training for higher dimensional thinking, to really take a look at what is being presented here, to really understand why it's important to be able to really comprehend it in this way. We go into this level of depth, and then there's also simultaneously the teaching, we must become like children, right? So it's like children don't necessarily comprehend these things at this level of specificity and, at this level of even complexity. So it's like, we don't have to see it this way, We can be like children and manifest our desired reality just simply by being as a child and simply believing it's real. And also, when we are called to develop a dimensionally larger aspect of our awareness, which if you're attending Sunday Mystery School, you definitely are, you can also choose to develop these aspects of your dimensional nature. Okay? You can choose to become educated. And obviously, the question is, can we allow ourselves to become educated and develop this awareness while also maintaining that pure, peaceful faith like a child? And I believe the two ideas can coexist. It is a mark of spiritual maturity to both be able to speak the language of higher dimensional thinking and also to exist in that pure faith like a child, childlike faith. Okay, so that's the Neville part of the lesson. I'm now going to invite anyone who is in the Zoom room, members of the channel Mastermind, who would like to contribute anything here. Let me adjust the settings. Here we go. Hi, Orlena, go ahead.
Yes. So I have so many questions.
Okay, what you got?
But okay. So what Neville is saying that we have the ability to control our dreams?
Yes.
Okay. But if you don't remember your dreams, like how can you control them?
That's a great question.
Or you give it, okay, that's one of my questions. If you can answer that.
Yeah, we'll start there. Okay, so this is where it's such an interesting thing because we're talking about developing abilities that for many of us, this is very new. And many of us have conditioning that teaches us to go the other direction with some of these abilities. You know, a lot of us have been conditioned to maybe not necessarily prioritize developing a strong attention or strong ability to focus or thinking in 4D. You know, a lot of us, you know, we come into these physical human bodies and we really start to focus on the physical 3D and we develop all kinds of physical 3D capabilities. You know, we go and work out our body and, you know, we have muscles and we can, you know, flexibility and all these, you know, types of things. But like, this is a whole other skill set. Okay. So when Neville says we can control our dreams, it's like, okay, so it's like, this is just like if you're going to go to the gym and develop, you know, strength or flexibility or endurance. It's a similar type of thing. You're going to develop an ability to really control your attention and your awareness. And it's really going to be through practice and training. Okay. So specifically what he's saying about learning to control the dream. So Neville obviously is a master, you know, so he's like, not only was he trained as an actor and a dancer, which really implies an ability to assume a state, you know, as an actor, you're assuming the state of a character, and then a dancer to express in the physical, you know, what is really a spiritual idea, such as emotion, or, you know, to really act out with the body, a higher dimensional idea. Okay, so he kind of came really well equipped to be able to practice some of these things.
Yes.
For the rest of us, this is going to be really a process of development. And it all starts with learning to control our attention in a controlled waking dream, which is what he's describing as this state akin to sleep.
Okay. So essentially what he's saying that if you get really good at the SATs, then you can control your dreams.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This is not that unlike what lucid dreaming teachers talk about or astral projection teachers talk about. I've had training in both, and really what they talk about is learning to control learn to retain control of your awareness while you're in states of deeper brainwave activity. So, you know, whereas most people they slip off to sleep and then their mind just, you know, in uncontrolled sense kind of wanders the fourth dimension. These teachers and Neville and others are talking about learning to retain that control so that even though your body fully falls asleep, your attention remains awake and focused and controllable.
Okay. So my next question is, what are the benefits of controlling your dreams if you can do SATs and just let it go and it'll manifest anyway?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you could consider that two different things. So for the purpose of manifestation,
Mm-hmm.
Controlling a controlled waking dream is a way to consciously create circumstances, which is the mystic superpower,
Okay.
right? It's like, other
Yeah.
people talk about like being able to, move objects with their mind, or like telepathy, or like different, human superpowers, which some people I believe legitimately have. For the
Yes.
mystic, it's the ability to consciously create circumstances,
Oh,
to the point where, our ability to use this technology is so advanced, to other people, it seems like magic. We just know what we're doing in terms of being able to control our attention in a controlled waking dream to create circumstances. Okay, that's separate and distinct. I
okay.
feel,
Uh-huh.
at least from where we're at in the teaching right now,
Mm-hmm.
that's separate and distinct from being able to control your awareness going into sleep, which is going into imagination, which is really access to really any world that you would choose to explore. So, for example,
Okay.
outside and beyond this 3D life that we each have a 3D life that we're living. Neville would talk about taking this ability to control his imagination and attention and going into sleep. He would travel to other dimensions, other realities, other earth planes, and he would go and he would teach there, just like in his waking reality, he was teaching here. Right.
Okay.
So this is parallel world travel. This is time
Yeah.
travel, dimensional travel. You can visit other reality. It's literally, the imagination is the portal to everything. And I know for some
Mm-hmm.
people that gets a little bit out there, and they're like, yeah, okay, that's fine, but really I just want to learn how to choose and control circumstances. Okay, that's the controlled waking dream.
Okay.
Everything else is above and beyond, and kind of after learning that basic skill of the controlled waking dream.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think I'm good now.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
I know these ideas get so abstract, but it's like, if we can't talk about them here, where are we going to talk about them? Like, that's
Exactly.
literally what this space is for, to
Exactly.
develop the language around some of these abstract ideas and extract the treasure that's in them. This
Right.
is incredible. It's amazing.
Right. So, okay, just to recap.
Yeah.
So, if you are a master at SATs, then eventually you can control your dreams.
Yes.
Okay. Can you, and if you're a person that doesn't necessarily remember your dreams,
Yeah.
can you use SATs to remember your dreams? Like
So you are I'm going to speak as though this is a blanket statement. I understand there's
right.
nuances and every human being is different. Okay. But I'm going to speak just for the point of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are you're not remembering your dreams because you have not indicated to your subconscious mind that it's important for you to remember your dreams. And the
Right.
number one way to do that is to write down anything you do remember as soon as you wake up with
Okay.
an urgency. Like,
Okay.
you come up out of sleep and you're like, I must write this down. That was important. If you
Okay.
start waking up, and this goes for everyone who's hearing my voice right now, if you start waking up in the morning and instantly reaching for a pad of paper or your phone, or something where you can quickly
Mm-hmm.
write down anything, even if it's just fleeting impressions, if you
Mm-hmm.
do it with a sense of this is important, I promise you, you will begin to remember your dreams in ever increasing detail until they become so real you remember them as though they were real, as though they occurred yesterday. Like, just the same as you remember what happened yesterday, you will
Yes.
begin to remember your dreams that way. Just by impressing the importance of it on your subconscious mind and saying, I need to remember this.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Orlina, as always.
Yeah.
Miss Paula.
Yes. About sleeping dreams.
Yes.
I wake up remembering a lot of scenes from my dream, but I cannot put into words what actually happened. And there are feelings, and there are like visual tableaus, but I usually can't articulate what actually happened. So what do I do with that?
Yeah, so I have a couple ideas. So on the slightly more advanced or developed way of looking at this, you could draw something that you feel like symbolizes. I have an app that I use. It's called Awoken. It's a lucid dreaming app, and it has a notepad and then a little drawing section, so you can just quickly like draw whatever you were seeing.
Well, it's gonna be a lot of like spaces that seem meaningless. Like,
mhm,
there's a building over there.
mhm,
I'm standing in a yard.
mhm.
I'm walking down the street.
So
It's
these little glimpses of pictures. Yes.
yeah, and it's often just about moving from place to place
Okay.
and just going here and then going there and going there, but they don't seem to mean anything.
Yes. So then you can go a little bit abstract with it. You could literally draw a series of like squares to indicate that you're like sequentially moving from place to place, and then just sketch little things. There's also just the idea of recording in symbols, right? Like, and you may not even know what the symbols mean, but like however your hand feels inspired to move while you're holding the image of what you experienced in your mind, at least you are recording. That's the most important thing. Even if it doesn't make sense to you even later, you're recording. And by recording, you are indicating to the subconscious mind, this is important. I want more clarity in my dreams.
Okay. So even if I wake up and I feel like that dream was a total waste of time, I should just put down something.
So the clarity of my dreams varies from day to day. And I'm still doing some kind of scientific experiments to see if there's aspects of my lifestyle that lean towards better dream recall versus others, but varies from day to day. But every time I wake up, I try to remember something, even if it's just little glimpses. And sometimes my entries are something like there was a river and some mud, and I was walking somewhere, and that's all I remember. Sometimes that's literally all I write down, and that doesn't really mean anything to me later, but at least I wrote it down and told my subconscious, this is important.
Okay.
Makes sense?
All right. I can do that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Great. Perfect. Okay. Anybody else from the Zoom room? Any comments or considerations? If you are a member of the channel at the mastermind level and you are not in the Zoom room, this is your opportunity to join. The link is posted in the members area on the YouTube channel. We're going to do a mastermind session here once we wrap up the live stream and have some discussion, kind of the masterclass after the masterclass. So we're going to do that. So go ahead and hop in the Zoom room if you're not already. And Roxy?
Hi, Josiah.
Yeah, go ahead.
As someone who's been an avid dreamer their whole life,
Awesome.
and have had dreams of every range, prophetic, some of the ones that make absolutely bizarre to us in the 3D. Like last night, I dreamt my husband was in a truck that we had before, which I learned symbolism. It's, reflecting from the past. And he had the truck, and they were in the vehicle, and the vehicle was on the bed. And I'm like, how did you get the truck on the bed? And he's like, there's this app. It's like a magnetic app that literally can pull large objects. So I was like, okay, this is absolute weirdo stuff. Yep. But I don't know what that means, but I take note of it and, get a chuckle and move on.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding is, and I'm glad you picked up on it, you said it in the end of the live stream, of the idea that kind of like blending a softness to what Neville teaches, because the idea of like, it becomes so technical that you're like, where's the magic, the juicy, because that are totally like, oh, that's just cute. It's just, it's manifestation, but not in a way that I sat down in a chair and I, technically did these things. And I think you even brought up with Arlena in one of her questions when you said she didn't consciously think about the class, but she's already in that state because of being in this environment. So you don't have to literally sit there. So my advice, just observing that about blending the two, which I'm glad I'm in this group, because sometimes I want to like get rid of Neville. Like it's just too hard and fast. That for people with the dreams, that to have some kind of fun with it, because my husband doesn't remember any dreams at all. Me being a person who literally does not go a day without dreaming, and sometimes 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 dreams a night, and wake up tired because I'm literally dreaming all night. I can't even fathom that. How do you wake up and not had any dreams? He's like, I don't remember anything while I slept. So I think that we could say, okay, universe, source, I want to have fun with this dream thing. I want to experience what it's like to experience that, just plain and simple, not even for the sense of I'm going to analyze it and it's going to give me direction about my life. So I think that probably easing into it that way will eventually lead to the part where we can use it as an analytical tool or a tool for manifestation, but now starting out wanting to use it as manifestation, if that makes sense.
That does make sense.
Because my dream life is fun. It's the funnest part of my whole life, actually. The things happen in my dreams.
Yes, it can be. I love that you shared that, Roxy, because it really can be. And I like what you said about kind of blending in a softness. So that's one of the things that's so amazing about this path and these teachings is that it's both. There's both like a masterclass, super advanced aspect to it, and then it's also like literally the childlike curiosity and wonderment. It's all of those things at once. And I think really how to express our mastery is being able to gracefully embody both a profound understanding of these really advanced concepts and also, kind of exist in our childlike wonderment together. And I love what you said about the, dreaming being kind of one of the most fun parts of your life. That's really what it can be. I've tasted that as well. It really can be, access to quite literally a dimensionally larger world, a playground of sorts. So it is, we can develop these things. We can get super technical with it, like you're saying, but then again, it's like, it's not necessary, but we can choose to do it. And I see that as choosing to be the master, like to really understand something, you have to be able to explain it, as Neville was saying in our last episode. Like evidence of really understanding something is being able to explain it. I think that's where some of this language comes in, learning to speak the language of it, learning to like relate to the ideas. But then also, if some of this seems like a little out there, don't judge yourself. Don't be like, oh, I'm not getting it. Like it's fine. Like even just the fact that you're allowing, like by pouring your attention into it, right? Because all of our attention is focused on this right now. We're giving life to these ideas and to expressing them in ever bolder, more beautiful, more abundant ways. And I think that's really where we can kind of like ground this conversation in that, like just having this conversation, regardless of the level of understanding that we ultimately find ourselves in about it. There's value in that, and we are developing an aspect of our awareness. And I think each of us are going to carry a new understanding of dreams and of consciousness and dimensionality out of this session. I think that's the real value. So thank you for that, and thank you everybody for being here. To everybody on YouTube, thank you for joining the live. I know this is the end of lesson 5, but Sunday Mystery School isn't going anywhere. We're going to continue. Be back next week, getting into the Q&A, which is fascinating. What people, just imagine, right? Like people go through this whole experience with Neville. What questions are they going to have to ask? Right. So we're going to get into that next week, get into the Q&A with Neville, and then we'll continue on from there. So until then, practice, my friends, practice, practice, practice. And as always, imagine wisely, my friends, and we will see you all in the next.